Cabinet Director for Governor Snyder, and this morning I am sitting in for Harvey Hollins. We somehow mistaken Indy for a camcorder. They will be using that incredibly advanced technology to be posting up on YouTube. Lieutenant Colonel Klinsky, we should start the introductions. My co-chair, why don't we move this way?
I really don't know what to say, but thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Chris Kolensky with the Michigan State Police.
Rich Beard, Governor's Office.
Inspector Chris Bush, Emergency Management, Homeland Security.
Karen Weaver, Mayor, Flint.
Greg Weatherspoon, Interim Superintendent, Flint Community Schools.
Pamela Pugh, City of Flint, Chief Public Health Advisor.
Mark Young, Genesee County Board of Commissioners.
Jim Koski, Genesee County.
Lawrence Reynolds, Flint resident and senior citizen.
Bryant Melvin, Genesee County Board of Commissioners, representing the City of Flint.
Kyle Grant, Michigan Department of Education.
Santino Guerra, Flint City Council.
Eric Oswald, Director of the Drinking Water Municipal Assistance Division for the DEQ.
George Christian, DEQ.
Good morning, Scott Hippica, Governor's Office.
Michigan State Police, Emergency Management, Homeland Security.
Good morning, Stacy Clayton, Governor's Office.
Harvey Santana, Governor's Office.
Candace Machad, City of Flint. Jamaica Patrick Singleton, City of Flint, Chief Recovery Officer.
Steve Branch, City of Flint.
Gilchrist, City of Flint.
Shirley Jackson, City of Flint.
Jared Walhodsky, Michigan Department of Health and Human Services.
Amy Apke, DEQ.
Nick Payne, Governor's Office.
Jacques, why don't we move over to you?
Jacques McNeely, City Medical Office.
Josh Freeman from the Genesee County Board of Commissioners Office.
You have a lady at the end?
Nina Center, DePass.
Okay. Anybody else that walked in that I missed?
Adam Clayton, Office of Parks and Transportation.
I knew what you meant. Thank you.
Angel Wheeler, City of Flint.
And General McDaniels just stepped out. He is here.
So we should talk about him in his absence. Is that what you're suggesting? I'm sorry? Who's on the, oh. And Stacy just pointed out to me that Ruud Scholdeman, I got the first one inexplicably correct, is on the phone and will be participating later. Thank you all for being here. I will try and be a worthy second to Mr. Hollins. And Mayor Weaver, I think I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, and good morning, everybody. Really, what I wanted to do is say it's been a little while since we've met, and one of the things I hope everybody has been able to see since the last meeting is that we have been moving from crisis to recovery. A lot of good things have been going on in the city of Flint. There's been tremendous progress, but there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Since our last meeting, we received a $30 million grant from HUD for the Choice Neighborhood, so that was exciting for the residents to see that happen. Last week, we just had Lear with their grand opening, and we know that's bringing jobs to Flint. Just this past week, we had 2 more businesses that had their ribbon cutting right downtown in Flint. So things are happening in Flint, and we're very excited, we're very proud. I said, but we're still working to make sure we have clean water for our residents. That still remains our top priority here in the city of Flint. While we've been making that kind of progress, it has been very disappointing that it seems like MDEQ has chosen to play this argument out in the media. And I think our issue with that is it still puts cost over the lives of the people of the city of Flint. And we're not happy with that. It's very disappointing that we're not worth traditional excavation. Before, we said we weren't worth $100 a day for corrosion control, and now we're not worth traditional excavation. And we're not going to stand for that. We know that we have missed missed some homes. We know we found out accidentally because the plumber is here that showed us what we missed by doing traditional hydro excavation. What we found out was, and I'm going to have Max show that, but when we were doing hydro excavation, it would get marked copper to copper. Well, one of the contractors didn't see that and accidentally dug it up and found out that it was fixed with copper, but it was still a lead line. And our goal is to get all of the lead service lines out of the city of Flint. And we don't care about the cost. It's been sad to see in the press that it says we're going over budget. We have not gone over budget. That is not true. And you know what? What if we did? Our lives are worth it. Our lives are worth it. We know in the last few weeks, I went out last week. I was on Court Street. There were two that we got, and they said we could not have gotten it through hydro excavation. We were out in the 4th Ward last week on Craig Street. There were two more that were missed, that would have been missed had we done traditional hydro excavation. So we know we've missed a dozen. We know we've missed more than a dozen, but we can document a dozen just within the last few weeks. And to be told that those are just casualties of war is very disheartening to the people of this city. It's very disheartening. We don't want to miss one resident, not one resident in the city of Flint. And for people to say that it's okay, it's not okay. It's not okay because the people that are saying that don't live here. They drive out of town when they leave here. And then we're left, we're left with that. We're left with that. And our lives are worth something. And that's all we're asking for. That's all we're asking for. There's nowhere in a settlement that it says you have to hydro excavate. There's nowhere that it says that. We know that, and I have not only the plumber here, I saw the inspector come in. One of the conversations he had, and I'm going to let him talk, was that over on the east side it was splicing. The city of Flint didn't have money to replace those lines with copper, so they fixed it. They did patchwork with copper, and they are lead and galvanized lines. There's a lot of them, close to 1,000. He said they did the work. They know that. They know that. And we're still having arguments about hydro excavation and why we don't want to do that, why we don't want to cut cost for the people that live in this city. For the people that live in this city. We have people whose lives will never be the same, no matter what we do. And for us to say that we're not worth it, to challenge why we want to do hydro excavation and to play this out in the media, I think is really sad. And I wish we were sitting down together at the table saying, how do we fix this problem? It's like we're halfway there. How do we come together and put the people over the differences we have in money and not keep arguing in the media? We're talking about health. We're talking about quality of life. And we're not going to stand for it. We're not going to stand for it. Cost, looking at cost is what got us in this problem. That's what got us here. And we deserve more than that. We deserve more. And we're going to continue to fight. I've been told, well, you need to sign this because you're out of compliance. Why don't you all, we want to sit down and work through this. That's what we want. We did it before. But now all we want to do is fight in the media when we have people's lives at stake. It's hard. It's hard because we shouldn't be using our time, our effort, our energy that way. We ought to be doing traditional excavation, giving people the confidence that they need to know that their pipes are good. I was out the other day. One of the contractors had told me he couldn't talk to me. He was told don't talk to them about what we're doing, about how we're finding these pipes that we wouldn't have found. And that's sad. That's sad that's what they would say to us. I said, don't talk to us about what you're finding in our city for our people. It's wrong. It's wrong. And Max, can you please show I want you to see this again, because when you go in and you dig the hole, it might look like copper. But if you go 2 feet, 3 feet, 4 feet down, you see it's a galvanized line. You see it's a lead line that hydro vacuum doesn't get. They told us when we were on Court Street, they had to go to the middle of the street to see that. Well, we're worth that. We're worth it. And I'm going to continue to fight for that. I'm not going to be forced or bullied or talked about in the media. I mean, I've been there. And you see, I can stand it. So that's not going to push me aside. And I'm going to continue to be a voice for the people of the city of Flint. I'm going to speak up. I'm going to speak out. I'm going to tell you why we don't want shortcuts. We want quality of life, and the people deserve quality of life in Flint. So, Max, can you please show this one more time in case people missed it?
These are a couple examples of what we're finding. And this is stuff that we're finding underground, okay? And these are what they're referring to. These are the connections that they're making, and these are repair connections, okay? And these can be this far, they can be that far. I've had some that were a couple feet back. These are just a few of the examples that we're finding underground, and this had no stop on it. So this went from lead to whatever. These are just some of the examples. This is stuff that they're finding with the iron, with the lead. And these are only a few of the this again was a repair underneath there, which nobody would know. There's no way for us to tell. I've been doing this almost 30 years, so you can't tell without visually seeing this. And when it's hydrovac'd this far over here in a hole this big, you can't see it. And I'm not blaming a machine. It's just what it is. I have a bunch of them, but that's the general. That's how they all. That's what we're finding, and that's not in every case. And we're finding them. And the more I talk to people, and the more I talk to plumbers, we gossip like everybody else. That we're finding it a lot more than what people are saying. I'm just one guy who found it. There's other plumbers out there. So, and I can tell you, I've found more than a few personally that I was on. So.
Thank you. And this is the inspector that we were talking about, the east side.
Can we get you to stand next to the interpreter, please?
Have you guys ever spoke to our foreman's, Howard Swickert or Paul Simpson? Any engineers here? I mean, have you? Have they given you good insight on what our?
I spent a year last year working out in the field with the contractor.
Yeah.
So I saw
right.
And some of them, and I just have a couple questions about that. Most of the time, am I correct that most of the time the leaks where they're repaired are close to the curb box or close to a joint, especially with galvanized, because that's where it would rust out first.
Yeah, at the thread there.
So most of the time you're going to find it close to that. What if someone were to use, and the reason I say hydrovacing is because hydrovacing is safer than excavating.
Jim, can you use your mic, Jim, so we can make sure we capture it? I'm afraid they aren't going to hear you on the live stream.
I'm sorry.
Yep, thank you.
Most of your, as I said, most of your connections where they fail is by the curb box, because that's where your threads are, and that's where you're more susceptible. And if one were to hydrovac, of course, to notice, and the idea of hydrovacing was just to daylight, what we call daylight, the material down there. If one were to hydrovac back further, plus there, and then go back 4 or 5 feet or 10 feet and hydrovac again, wouldn't that save money and still make it where, because I know if you start digging, and a lot of these are the way they used to do them, they would put the water line right on top of the sewer line. And your chances when you're digging it up, you're going to break the sewer.
Excuse me for just a minute. We are so tired of hearing about saving money.
Well,
We, really.
safer, it's
No,
safer
okay,
to
well, let's
do.
talk about public health. We're
Okay.
tired of hearing about saving money because saving money is not what we're here to do.
Well,
Yeah, if you have a copper line, and, you know, we've done, you know, thousands of line replacements, Rob can attest to that, to the houses. You know, we usually have contractors do that. You never see copper to galvanize, you always see lead to galvanize. And if there's a repair made on the lead line, where it be on the short side, the main and the curb stop, maybe 5 feet away, I mean, we'll splice 5 feet to the curb stop.
yeah, you're not excavating up the whole road, though. When you're doing this, you're just excavating probably to the curb line,
Now,
correct?
let me speak on that. That's where the problem lies, okay? Where, how do we know, when they did it, they could have done it 20 years ago.
Correct.
Okay, so that's where we're finding these, is how do you know who made it? There can be private contractors or city guys who, you know, who do that, so that's what the problem is, so.
So are you excavating all the way to the main from the curb stop?
No.
You're excavating to the curb line.
We're excavating as far as we would assume that the city would go without, because obviously we can see the road, see if the road's been cut, that's gonna give us indications. We just don't go out there blindly and start digging. You know, I've been doing this 30 years and I know you have as well, so when I speak of this, you can look at the lay of the land and you can go, okay, I can get a feel for this, but we still have to visually see it, okay? We can't tell if the earth was dug 20 years ago, but we can tell if the road was. That's gonna give us an indication. Like I said, we're not just digging in random fields, you know, it's very, you know.
No, I totally agree with the mayor and your, that, but just by hydrovac, you got the stop box, is probably just show you what's there, it's not going to tell you if a repair, and repairs from my age, they're about 3 feet, usually, because nobody wants to dig any further than they have to. You know, and that's where your repair usually is, within 3 feet of, now, and sometimes it's worse than that. But when you excavate from the curb box to the curb, chances are there's other utilities in that area. So hydrovacing is safer than digging around gas mains and the other things you find in there. And my idea is for the safeness of the people
Well,
working.
we have people that are qualified and know what they're doing as well. And this is what, I'm not here to argue. Well, maybe I am. But we're still talking about cost, and we're talking about what's going to make the residents of Flint comfortable. And the residents of Flint need to be confident. And hydrovacing does not give them confidence when we know we have missed people. I just don't understand why we can't sit down. I mean, Rich and I were sitting here talking. We don't agree on everything, but we've agreed on goals before. And we can do those things. I don't know why we can't sit down and say, what do we need to do? Let's get through this. We're not going over budget. Make the people of Flint whole again. That's it.
I don't think there's an argument of doing what the mayor's talking about doing. The argument, or the difference is how do you get to that point?
And
do you do it by
we said how we would like to get to that point, and it fits within the settlement, it fits within the budget, and so I don't know why others are concerned about, as long as we're getting it done, and we're getting it done with confidence. I don't know why you're concerned with how we're doing it. You should want to make sure it's that the people of Flint are comfortable. And that's what everybody here should be doing.
And I do,
Wanting to make
and that's
sure
why I
that
volunteered.
the people of Flint are comfortable. I'm tired of people saying they don't want to drink this water. I'm tired of bottled water. We don't want to be on bottled water forever. We're sick of it. I'm tired of recycling. I'm tired of plastic bags all over my house. And that's just me. And it's just me and my husband. So you think about all these people with kids. We're tired of it. We're sick and tired of it. You go and live this way. You come and live here and have to deal with it. I need a bigger recycle bin from whoever the garbage people are. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of it, and I'm tired of people having fear and anxiety and anger. We want to move on. And this is a way for us to move on because we know we're not missing anything. And we'd rather be, safe than sorry. I'd rather take longer and make sure it's right. I'm not trying to overspend. I'm not trying to save. I'm trying to do it right and make people in Flint be okay again. We want to be like everybody else. And some of us will never be like everybody else. That's all.
I have a question.
When we were here last,
Sorry, Jim, if you could turn yours off.
When we were here last, you agreed with, you affirmed the position that the city was taking. And I just want to know, what is the difference in the last time you were here to today?
Well, I had totally agreed to try to find all of these things. My question is the traditional excavation is safe and is any better than doing it a different way? Faster and safer, and yes, it costs less money, but that doesn't make it bad if you do it. And I've always been of the thought, because originally, if you recall, when we started that, we didn't use hydrovacing at first. We were excavating everything. And I brought that up a long time ago, that today, almost nationwide, they're doing it this other way now. But they weren't catching, like it's been brought up, they weren't catching the splices in the line by hydrovacing. And that's correct. I haven't changed my position. I just want to understand how one way is better than the other, looking at the whole thing. And as far as caring about the people of Flint, I wouldn't be sitting here, because I'm a volunteer, and I volunteered all last summer. And I was offered to be paid for it, and I wouldn't take it, because I care.
That's good, and we appreciate that, but we want to make decisions about us and for us. This is local. This is local, and Nationwide is not on our side right now. We're not trying to do what they're doing across the nation, because what's going on across the nation isn't what happened in Flint. And that's what we have to remember. Yep, our water's better. Yep, we're replacing the lines. But what happened in Flint is different than what happened any place else. And so sometimes you have to do some things differently in a place that's different from other people. So that's it. Yes.
I'm sorry, could I make one more point? Well, when they were hydrovac, it wasn't the people that I was working for. It's documented that I fixed at least a half dozen lines at the hydrovac. When you hydrovac, it doesn't disturb the lead, it doesn't disturb the copper, it disturbs galvanized. I have made repairs, so many, like I said, I'm one plumber, so I'm not talking
So Max, if I can follow up, nice to see you again, by the way.
Nice to see you.
Are all the ones where you found the splicing, are they on the city side?
I would say the majority, we still have, there are some that, you know, obviously there's no documentation on, you know, us as contractors didn't document with, you know, we'd
Right.
have the city shut off the water and then we would do ours. But then again, you know, again,
Yeah,
3 years down the road, we can't tell, you know,
I was just curious if you found any on the resident side of the curb box.
we have.
Okay. What's the greatest distance that you found? Where you see the splice from the curb box?
I have a piece of pipe that I, probably 5, 6 foot.
Okay.
That's, and now, you guys gotta take in perspective, when I'm saying that, I'm saying from the curb stop, 6 foot back.
Right.
That's one way back.
Oh, I agree.
Okay, yeah, and I know you know it, and then, so up, what we'll call north of the, you know, it could be up in the middle of the yard, but that's in the
Yeah.
residence. So we have found, you know, I would say an average, they need to go, they need to keep going at least as far as they're going right now.
Okay. Have you ever seen the double splice? I mean, have you ever gone into the home and it's copper in the house and it's copper in the curb box, but we've got galvanized in the middle somewhere?
Absolutely.
We have?
Yep. Yep. And that's been found more times than, yeah, because that's all it was the city had made a connection, and then the homeowner, you know, and we can obviously see that the
Yeah.
lines are broken. Like I said, we, you know, we take educated guesses as far as what we see, but visually, we have to visually see it. But normally, we see it broken up inside the house, and that's giving us an indication. But when we went back to copper, you know, and they said copper, copper, you dug a little farther, and there was skeleton. So, it's, you know, and you guys all know who's been in the trades, you know, when you walk up to the place, you never know what you're gonna, you never know what you're gonna find. I don't go in with a closed mind, I keep an open mind and let the problem tell me what to go. I don't go, I think it's gonna be this, well, then you're gonna be wrong 90% of the time, so.
Oh, I remember that one we did where it went on like this and it snaked around the house. Remember that? And the
Yep.
TV camera's there the whole time?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we tried that.
So, what's the advantage of excavating over doing sequential hydrovac, bottle only?
Well, and to say like the mayor says, I'm out there, I talk to the people, and when this first started, people came rushing out, told us their story. It's the only way to say it, they lift up shirts, they show us stuff. So that stuck in my mind, and then when I saw that piece of lead, I was, you know, after the whole street had been hydrovacs, and we accidentally went there, started digging, and then it just clicked into me that, you know, I gotta let someone know that this is, you know, and I don't even know how many on that street were, but the hydrovac only that big a hole, you know, it gives you a peek,
Yeah.
but yeah, there's more to the picture than just the peek.
Hang on, Rich and then Larry. Rich?
Two things. One is, thank you for the explanation, and I just want to say something about what the mayor said earlier. If there's any contractor that is refusing to talk to the city about what they're finding, they should be fired. Pure and simple, okay? Number two is, my layman's question is this. You asserted that you need a line of sight to see what's down there in order to have comfort that you've fixed the right things that are there. How far do you need to go, and kind of building on the general's question, how far do you need to go in both directions to have that comfort? And can a hydrovac do it as well as a full cut excavator?
That would have to be, the question would have to go to the hydrovac people, I'm not sure.
Oh, the one question should be towards the hydrovac. I'm not 100% sure if they're, all I can do is speak on what I do, so.
You know what I was thinking, Rich, when you're asking that, and I get your question, but I think some of it is not to make, sometimes you have to do something else to make the people. That's what it is, I think. And because there's been so much controversy with this, and because we know we've missed some, my concern is, how do we make the residents? So they might say, well, if we do it 10 times in a row, we'll get it, but I don't know if that's what's going to ease the mind of the people. And so we're thinking about that as well. Yes?
So, Rich, to your question, let me just, again, try and put some perspective to what Plummer is saying and to your question. So the hole is approximately 8 inches, right? So let's say we got to dig a hole here 8 inches. So you really would need to, you really would need to take and tie the same hole together to keep moving, like to trench it in order to be able to reach that point of where you're trying to go. Because if you take and say you dig 8 inches and then you go 4 feet further up, now what you have done is that, so what if, hypothetical, what if, Rich, that in that place that you skipped right in there, what if that is where you had a splice at? You missed it. So the only way that you could possibly do what you're saying doing is that you'd have to tie in the hydrovac would have to continuously tie in, like trench it all the way out through to the point to where you're trying to get. And I think the question that you're asking the plumber is, how far would one have to go to be able to say that he is in a comfort line of confident in mind to say, we caught it? Does that make sense?
Yes. I didn't know the answer, which is obviously why I asked the question. I don't know enough about hydrovacing. It's just, but I do understand that our contractors need to have a comfort level that they're remediating what is actually wrong down there, and that comes with knowing how far you go both ways to get that comfort. And my question is simply, if a hydrovac is safer, can it trench in the way we're talking about? And if it's not, then a full cut excavation is probably the smarter way to go. I'm just asking the question. I don't know the answer.
As far as what the hydrovac, obviously it's, for lack of a better term, it's a vacuum. It's taking all the dirt in. You do that to probably 3-4 houses, you have to go empty. And then you have to bring back in dirt. So, like I said, all I can do is give you the facts. I'm not 100% sure, but you know, if you talk to a hydrovac person, I know that you'd have to have, probably to get done as quick as they are, you'd probably have to have 5 hydrovacs on each side of the road to keep going, and they'd have to be emptied. So that would be something that you guys would have to ask them. But I know that when I've done it, and we filled up a hydrovac very quickly, very quickly.
Okay, we're running about 15 minutes behind now, but
Let me add one more piece to that, Rich, that I think one has to also take into consideration, is that we're also talking about the expense of the water that's on the city that the hydrovacing is using. That does not encompass that when we paying the water bill. So the hydrovacing is using water to do that. So I know that one has not considered that, but that's also need to be considered as well when we're talking about those tanks that has to be filled up. Now, I asked a question, so how much water are we using to be able to hydrovac? How much water are we using? That bill has not been paid, has not been told what that costs as well. So I think that when you put all of the pieces together, I don't think that there's that much differential in savings. I don't think so. It might be a little bit, but I don't think it's a whole lot when everything has to go into what has to be done. I think if you look at all of the components that has to go into it, I think that it's not just changing one piece of it, because if we just go back to where we are, you're only talking about an 8-inch hole. So now, in order to be able to do what they say, well, let's go with the hydrovac, and then also that's extra cost as well. So it's not the same thing as we saying. You understand what I'm saying? Okay.
Gil, Huey has been I bet Huey's paying attention to the water bill.
I most certainly am. And we're working on some sort of a calculation of what that number looks like in terms of the amount of money the water will cost for.
okay. Again, we're running about 15 minutes behind at this point, but Dr. Reynolds, you've asked quite a while.
Thank you. I live in a neighborhood where during the lead service line replacement, they had to dig in my driveway to find the lead line for the house across the street. Does that make this more complicated? And then I'm trying to catch up with the terminology where we talk about splicing. Is that the same thing as a partial lead service line replacement?
At the time, that's what they were doing. When they say splicing, it's more of like it should be called a repair. Something was leaking farther back, and so they made the repair. So that's what there's two different words saying the same thing.
Okay.
Splicing is just a repair back to bring it back to the homeowner.
And I thank you for that clarification because I'm trying to pin down, when I read an environmental health report written in 2010 about what happened in Washington, D.C., they talk about partial lead service line replacements having unpredictable release of lead for up to 4 to 18 months. And so I think that's getting to the heart of my concern as a resident and perhaps the city of Flint people's concerns and what you've suggested. So this is nothing, speaking as a reckless observer, I don't think this is anything new. And I thank you for being so careful.
Okay, the only thing I would add is partial lead service lines are now illegal in Michigan pursuant to the rules that we all developed together. I'd like to move
But they were under the ground and they are under the ground now.
Right, absolutely. I'm talking prospective.
And before we move on, because I see your.
I know. I'm not very good at hiding.
No, you're not. So, because I really think that Mayor Weaver should be commended for the position that she's taken, as Dr. Reynolds has mentioned, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows that we have folks from the Washington, D.C. area here with us today. They're from our Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration with the U.S. government, and there are funders for the Resiliency in Communities After Stress and Trauma funding. And so I just want us to be mindful that we have exacerbated social and emotional stress here in the city of Flint. So they're here making sure that we're handling this. So as Mayor Weaver is talking not only about the physical health, we're also talking about the peace of mind that the residents of Flint do deserve.
Thank you. Mr. Young, county update?
Yes, I just want to do a quick update on the Healthy Start program. We have several processes in place. We are going forward. We have regular meetings with HRSA on that. Our partners continue to meet and work on data sharing processes to minimize duplication in contacting the residents. All of our partner contracts have been signed except for the one with MSU. We're working through those details as we speak. We're hiring staff to conduct the outreach, case finding, and assess children's needs. And other community agencies are also being identified who could assist with this work as possible additional subcontractors such as Genesee Health Plan and the CRIM Foundation. And I did also want to stress that the Genesee County Health Department did issue a statement on May the 16th, 2018, issuing reminder regarding the Flint Water Emergency Declaration and recommendations, and that they also are, the Health Department supports the Genesee County Medical Society's recommendations regarding Flint municipal water, in particular that children less than 6 years old, pregnant women, and individuals with weakened immune systems should continue using only bottled water for drinking, cooking, and brushing teeth. Filtered water can be safely consumed after boiling for those at risk individuals unable to access purified bottled water. So one of the concerns I have with that is that we have a lot of issues where a lot of residents that aren't able to access bottled water as we go forward, and unfortunately, this problem's not done. As much as a lot of people here, and I'd love to have this process all taken care of and not need to be here, and I'm I'm sure the mayor would echo that sentiment, but I think at this point in time, I think we're just way too premature, and, you know, the issues with bottled water still have grave concerns to the citizens of Genesee County. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry, George, I think you're up next. Mr. Christian, DEQ water quality update?
Thank you, Mike. So what I want to focus on today is the latest round of testing that we did in the Flint community schools. And this time around, so number one, the news is very good. It's very encouraging. The testing that we did focused on the bubblers and the coolers, which last time when we met, we talked about this was what the focus was going to be, because we wanted to make sure that where the points of use were intended for the students to drink, that we had some good information as to what was going on there. The one concern that we had going into this testing is that these bubblers and coolers had been installed in 2016 and have essentially sat idle for 2 years, so we weren't really sure what to expect when we...
I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you differentiate
Oh.
bubblers and coolers and what the...
Yes, I was going to do that. Yeah. So...
Bubbler and cooler is, because I was asked that yesterday, so I want to make
Yes, yeah. Yes, absolutely. So, like I indicated, these bubblers and coolers were installed in 2016, and we had a concern that there may have been some issues from them sitting idle for that period of time. So to your question, Pam, the bubblers are predominantly in the elementary schools, and they're right there at the sink. If you hearken back to your days in elementary school, there would be a regular faucet, and then off to the side, there would be a little bubbler, and the bubbler is simply the little fountain head with the button that you push down on, and the water came out. And the coolers are what are out in the hallway. So what used to be in the schools were those old china fountains. They were made of porcelain, and they didn't have any sort of reservoir or anything like that. And those got upgraded to the newer models that have a cooled reservoir, so it's actually refrigerated water. And on both of those, the thing to keep in mind is there are inline filters prior to that. So in the previous testing that we did...
Excuse me, George, Dr. Sullivan has a quick question.
Just a clarifying question about those filters. When you say they're inline filters, does that mean that they can't be taken out and replaced? Does that mean they're semi-permanent? What does that mean as far as...
They can't be bypassed.
Right,
Okay?
but I'm assuming they have to be serviced.
Correct.
And so the servicing of those filters would, I would imagine, involves taking a cartridge out and putting a new cartridge in?
That is correct.
Is that something that would require, is that something that a staff person would be able to do?
Yes.
And
typically the custodial staff are...
And for the bubbler, when the bubblers were installed, that's just the fixture, right? Does that mean that at the same time the faucet was installed and the filter below, or was just the bubbler installed in 2016?
Everything was replaced in 2016. Lara went through in all the schools throughout the city, not just at FCS, but at the daycares, the parochials, elder care facilities, everywhere where there was a population at risk, and the fixtures were replaced. So in the schools, the bubblers were replaced at the same time that the faucets were replaced. Everything was replaced with the 2014 compliant standard.
So the bubbler and the faucet share a filter?
They do not. The bubbler is what has an inline filter on it. So there's a line that leads into underneath the sink, and then it tees off, and that's the cold water line. And then one part of the tee runs off to the faucet, and then the other part of the tee feeds the bubbler. On the faucets, if you'll recall, we had installed the point-of-use filter devices.
So the faucet, so if you flush at the faucet, the water doesn't go through the filter?
That is correct.
That's my point, thank you.
Okay. So, as I stated, these points of use, the bubblers and the coolers, had been sitting idle for approximately 2 years. So we wanted to find out what kind of impact that might have. And so, as I indicated, there were actually 2 types of filters. Back in 2016, we had tested the point of use filters, which are the faucet mount filters that go right there on the faucet. And there's a slight difference between a faucet mount filter and an inline filter, in that with the faucet mount filter, the last thing that the water touches is the filter itself. With an inline filter, there's a piece of plumbing that runs from the inline filter and feeds the bubbler. And while that, all of that met the 2014 requirements, we had a concern that if it was sitting there for 2 years, that there might be some issues. So what we did was we implemented our sampling protocol, which was a 2-day process. On the first day, what we did was we conducted a flush at all of these points, just for, to be able to get fresh water over there, and also to condition the filters, because the filters were dry filters. We installed new filters in there, and so we conditioned them per the manufacturer's specifications. So then we allowed everything to stagnate overnight. Per the LCR, it's a minimum of a 6-hour stagnation period, but typically the reality of it is it was usually in the neighborhood of 12 to 14 hours, give or take a little bit, that they actually stagnated for. And when we came back the next day to pull the samples, we took 2 sequential 250 ml samples at each point. So we would turn on the bubbler or the cooler, and we would pull a 250 ml sample, and then immediately after that, we pulled a second one, because we wanted to see that if there was any lead there, how quickly did it disperse, okay? So with that in mind, the results were really, really encouraging. We had taken a total of 420 samples at 210 locations at all 13 of the FCS facilities, and 100% of those samples were below the 15 part per billion action level for lead, and 100% of them were also below the action level for copper. With respect to the bottled water standard, 419 out of the 420 samples, or 99.8% of those samples, met the bottled water standard, and 371 of those 420, or 88.3%, had no detectable amount of lead in them. There was a little bit of a difference between the 2 samples per point. There were, of the few samples that did have lead, they were primarily at the first sample. There were only 5 samples that contained any measurable amount of lead in the second sample. So 97.6% of the filter 2 samples were non-detected. So the second sample, almost all of them were non-detect. So whatever minor amount of lead there was there quickly dispersed.
When you take 2 samples immediately after one another, the second sample isn't a measure of how much the lead is dispersed, it's a measure of how much lead was that much further back in the line. So if the first sample has lead and the second doesn't, it just tells you that it's more likely that the lead that's present is in the immediate vicinity of the bubbler rather than further back.
Well, that's partially true, but if there's a significant amount of lead, that's why we took 2 samples, because we wanted to see what sort of lingering effects there might be. And so if there, hypothetically, if there would have been a very significant amount of lead, we would have been able to determine, again, if there was any sort of dispersion that was not taking place over there. So, I mean, your point is well taken, and there's truth to that, but it also is a measure of the propensity for the lead to linger, because we did the measurements, and typically, based on the fact that it was about a 20 to 30-inch line that was feeding it, the first sample would take the water going back to the filter, and so that had been in direct contact with that lead, or excuse me, not the lead, with the copper line that was feeding it. And then the second sample more than likely would have been freshly filtered and wouldn't have had much contact time.
I've got one other question about your flushing. You said it was 2 hours?
No, it was actually about 10 minutes.
Then that was like the night before?
Yes.
And when you flushed the bubblers, did you flush at the bubbler or?
At the bubbler.
Okay, because there's been talk about flushing the faucet versus.
So if we go back to the discussion regarding the T.
Yeah.
So we wanted to make sure that we were flushing that copper line that was feeding the bubbler, because if you'll recall, I indicated that that had sat idle for 2 years.
Right.
So we didn't know what kind of effect that was. So we flushed at the bubbler for approximately
Right, but 10 minutes would have been what? I mean, that's still a while. Right, that's not fresh.
It depends on the usage pattern of the, so the assumption is, what we wanted to do was isolate where that bubbler was.
Okay.
Okay, and so that part had not been used for 2 years. When you go back to the T, however, that part had been used because everything behind that had been coming to the faucet. Yeah.
Very good.
Okay. So then, just a couple of other points to make here real quick. Out of the 13 facilities, the good news is 6 of those facilities have non-detect for lead at all locations, so that was very good news.
You mean all bubblers and coolers?
Everywhere that we tested, 6 out of the 13 facilities were ND everywhere. So what we're just simply suggesting is, regular water usage certainly is encouraged just to help maintain the water quality. The other thing that I'd like to very briefly talk about is the city has officially taken over the LCR sampling, and we've been able to communicate with Rob Benzik here, and it sounds like the city is doing a great job at making sure that they're pulling all of the LCR samples that are required per the settlement agreement and per the LCR requirements. It sounds like they're right on track with everything. I don't have any results. That's the city's endeavor right now, but it sounds like that effort is going very well.
Thank you, George.
One other
sure.
quick. So the plan going forward then is for points of use for school children not to consume water from faucets. Yeah?
Well, ultimately, and I believe the superintendent is going to be discussing the plan forward.
Right,
so
but based on what you've done, your testing, you're assuming that the points of use for water for consumption for children will only be bubblers and coolers.
The testing that we conducted was to confirm that the bubblers and coolers that had been installed were being effective in doing
And so
what they...
in the schools, there won't be point of use filters.
I'm not the person to answer that question. Okay. As I indicated, the superintendent is going to be discussing what the plan is for the schools moving forward. All we're doing is providing information to the superintendent.
Would your recommendation be that school children should not drink from the faucets?
My recommendation is, per the plumbing code, children typically drink at coolers and bubblers. That's the established pattern usually in schools. Each school has the ability to make the decision as to what they want to do.
I guess I would comment that at the schools in Flint, it's probably not true that the children abide by plumbing code as far as which faucets they drink from. We should recommend that they not consume water from faucets. It would be good that we know that.
Well, again, going back to the plumbing code, faucets are not really considered an intended point of use. So, we wanted to make sure, we were looking at, in all of our testing up until recently, we were trying to establish worst-case scenarios, and we were always focused on worst-case scenarios. We did do some filtered testing in 2016 to demonstrate that the filters were effective, and it clearly showed they were effective. And now that the water is better than what it was back in 2016, it continues to show the same thing.
Thank you, George. Any other questions for George? Yes, Dr. Reynolds.
I'm sorry, George, this is a part B. Okay, so the lead part has been addressed, but then there's the other issue of, in case there's a boil water advisory, what is the recommendation for servicing those inline filters? Because if it's a boil water advisory, potentially those filters have been contaminated. So I hope that somewhere in these discussions we'll pay attention to how we would instruct the schools as well as the homeowners what to do in that situation.
And the current literature on boil water notices, and while I will agree with you, it has been targeted towards residents, the boil water notices have indicated that residents should replace their filters after the boil water notice is lifted.
And the reason I bring it up is the accessibility of those filters is a concern, and would that be done and followed through in case of a boil water advisory?
I can't answer that, Dr. Reynolds, because we're not in charge of something like that. I mean, we can certainly have discussions about that, but I don't have a pat answer.
I only bring it up because I didn't want the superintendent to be blindsided by, well, we have filters and everything's good. Oh, here's a boil water advisory, school starts on Monday, and the filters are there, and it hasn't come up.
Thank you.
And Dr. Reynolds, we do have that listed in the presentation that that Superintendent Witherspoon and I talked about as a concern that we need to continue. Well, it's a list of concerns, part of a list of concerns that we continue to have. My question is around the baseline testing and going back to the chlorine residual. And I know that as we've talked, we said that we were going to come back together with the Technical Advisory Council and make sure that we're aware and collectively coming up with solutions as to how we address the non-detect as it relates to the chlorine residual that was found during the baseline testing. And I don't know if you want to speak to that or if you've given any more thought to that.
Well, just to make sure that we have context around that, the water coming into the school buildings, without exception, has carried a very good chlorine residual. There were engineering decisions that were made decades ago that have created some situations at certain parts of some of the buildings where, for example, a cold water line is running parallel to a radiant line, and it is causing a dissipation of the chlorine residual. Likewise, there are some other areas in some of the buildings where there's a recirculation pump, and partially because of the diminished usage of the water in the schools, these recirculation pumps just keep on recirculating the water, and due to the friction of the pump and the heat that's generated by the pump, it tends to warm up the water. So you have another instance where you can have a dissipation of the chlorine residual. So I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that the water entering the buildings does in fact carry a very healthy chlorine residual, and so we do have in some of the buildings some engineering decisions that were made decades ago that are having some impacts on the chlorine residuals, and we can certainly discuss that.
Thank you. Mr. Hippica, could you give us a brief update on where we are on FWED if we are now 25 minutes back?
Sure. So in October of 2015, the governor appointed an independent task force to examine the Flint water crisis. In March 2016, that report was released. That report included 44 different overall recommendations. 3 were given to the city, 3 to the county health department, and then 3 to the US EPA. 35 were given to the state. Of that, the state has completed 26 of the 35. So from a percent completion perspective, which the folks in this room who I work with a lot know, I track overall data. That's what I do. So 59% overall of the 44. And this with the state-specific items that the state was requested to examine, there's 74% complete with those. I can't speak to the county, federal, or city referred items, of which there were 9 of those. And the state is still working through potentially 9 of those that are on the list still remaining. So that's a high-level summary, Mike.
Any questions?
And if there's any questions, I did provide a handout prior to the meeting, and I'm happy to address those afterwards if anybody has any specific questions. This is the handout that was given to the folks at the table, as well as some in the room as well.
Thank you very much for being prepared as always, Scott. Are there any quick questions for Scott? Hearing none. The next presentation is the name that I butchered the first time. Let me see if I can apologize to him by getting it correctly. It will be a KWR update by Ruud Schultemeier. I totally screwed it up again, and Rich Baird.
So I'm going to tee up Ruud, and fortunately Ruud has a nickname which I quite like using, which is Rudy. So if you have any questions,
why didn't you tell me that at first?
We like to see you bumble around there, Mr. Chairman, acting. Just let me tee this up. In 2014 and 15, we had 2 outbreaks of Legionnaire's disease in the city of Flint. They coincided with a change in drinking water quality in April 2014 when the water switch was made. So to address the issues associated with protecting the people of Flint, the Flint Area Community Health and Environment Partnership, known as FACHEP, was established by the state of Michigan to execute a very large, complex, and multidisciplinary project which has the title Enhanced Disease Surveillance and Environmental Monitoring in Flint, Michigan. FACHEP is a team led by Wayne State researchers who specialize in environmental engineering and public health, and they were conducting an independent study to evaluate the possible association between changes in Flint's water system and public health, specifically the recent Legionnaire's disease outbreak. In 2017, FACHEP drafted a number of journal articles that were supposed to explore the statistical relationship between the change in water source and the incidence of Legionnaire's disease in Flint and other southeast Michigan counties, and the prevalence of various strains of Legionella found in the cities of Flint and Detroit. During Health and Human Services Michigan's review of the articles, experts discovered what they perceived as flaws in the research and requested an external independent third-party review. The KWR Water Cycle Research Institute was selected, and they published their results in October of 2017. This body is familiar with KWR. They've appeared before this body twice since we were formed to discuss the work they had done in the Netherlands as well as other places. KWR's review indicated that they had some concerns regarding FACHEP's findings, including the statistical relationship between the change in water source and the incidence of Legionnaire's disease. And based on these concerns, the state of Michigan asked FACHEP if it was willing to continue the partnership under the independent review and oversight of KWR. FACHEP indicated that they did not wish to do so, to continue under those conditions. So in the interest of completing the original intent of the project, the state of Michigan contracted with KWR in an effort to address the original intent. KWR Water Cycle Research Institute is a scientific research firm based in the Netherlands that generates knowledge to enable the water sector to operate water wisely throughout the world and to address complex water challenges. the name KWR stems from the worldwide organization known as KIWA. KIWA is a world leader in testing, inspection, and certification in a wide variety of market segments ranging from construction and energy supply to drinking water, healthcare, food, feed, and farming. As an offshoot of KIWA, KWR was established about 12 years ago in 2006 to perform scientific research specifically associated with the water sector. So, on the phone today is Rudy Skolderman from KWR. He's the project manager and the lead contact for this project. He is an international experienced management consultant specializing in development of research and development and innovation programs in energy, water, and sustainability markets. And he is going to give us an update on KWR's scope, findings to date, and what the expectations are as they continue their work. Over to you, Rudy.
Okay, thank you very much. Can everybody hear me fine? Okay. As Mr. Bird stated, KWR, at the request of the state of Michigan, is currently in the process of carrying out a scientific independent retrospective outbreak analysis. And what this means is that we are looking at the outbreak situation using existing data. And the objective of this study is to investigate the Legionnaires' disease cases in 2014 and 2015 and to determine the strength of association with possible Legion loss sources. And the strength of association comes from the number of cases that share a particular exposure and that can point to a possible source of exposure, a water system. In addition, KWR also wants to reconfirm the occurrence of an outbreak. And an outbreak
Sounds like there's something brushing against the mic.
In this case, Legionnaires' cases. This is done by comparing the data on the incidence of, which is the number of cases per 100,000 population in Genesee County with the rest of Michigan and the United States to reconfirm the outbreaks in 2014 and 15. And we see that in 2016-17 there was no more increase in Genesee County of Legionnaires' cases. KWR has mobilized an outbreak investigation team of epidemiology and outbreak investigation experts for this project. And this team is assigned to develop the investigation from the ground up. That means that the Legionella outbreak investigation will be conducted as a retrospective investigation in this line. And more specifically, KWR will not use the line list, which is the list that systematically organizes the individual case information. Outbreak report and chart group that Michigan Department of Health and Services investigated, but we'll start from scratch from Michigan surveillance system. And this disease surveillance system is the digital database recording all recordable diseases in Michigan, of which Legionnaires is one. And the rationale for taking this approach, building it from the ground up, is that KWR is to conduct its own independent investigation. So for this, we will follow the CDC guidelines for the steps in an outbreak investigation. To assure quality of this study, an independent review panel has been put in place to provide independent oversight of the scientific quality of this retrospective outbreak investigation. The panel is responsible for reviewing the design of the outbreak study and evaluating the transparency, the strength of evidence, and the completeness of the investigation and the results, conclusions, and recommendations. These independent reviewers will jointly discuss the study design phase and the outcome phase of the research. To get the information we need for the research, the KWR team has submitted a data use request to the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services because this is the organization that actually maintains the disease surveillance system. So that's where all the baseline information is housed. So we submitted this data request in order to secure access to the necessary data, and the outbreak investigation team started data collection and review of this data in June, July. In July, the research protocol then was submitted to the independent panel for review, and this panel met in Lansing on August 7 and 8 to discuss the research protocol. Following this meeting, the research protocol is now being finalized, and panel recommendations about the study design and and data analysis are being incorporated. In the upcoming months, the study will then be carried out based on this approved research protocol, and the study conclusions will then be presented to the, I should say, the independent review panel at a second meeting, which will take place later this fall. Following then the incorporation of the panel's recommendation, the study will be made available to the public, and it will be submitted for scientific publication. The investigation is likely to give clues towards recommendations for the prevention of future outbreaks of Legionnaires in Genesee County and beyond. And these recommendations will be translated into practical and feasible recommendations for control of Legionella in and the transmission of Legionella via the associated types of water systems. And that's my update of the work that we've done to date and where we are moving over the next coming months.
Thank you very much.
Any questions for Rudy?
Larry. Sorry, Dr. Reynolds.
Yes, and I thank you. This has been very helpful. Is it possible I can have a document that I can take back to the Medical Society, Community and Environmental Health Committee, just so that we can keep up to date on these things, especially since we have a possible change in administration coming in December. I don't know how how it'll affect the transition of information, but it would be real helpful to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or questions? Dr. Pugh, I see you reaching for the button.
And I would just say the same, if we could get that information. And I know in the past, it's been really good for us to have that information. I know when the NSF group was coming to do their research, it was very helpful to have that information and look over it.
Okay. Superintendent Weatherspoon, I believe you're up.
Good morning, thank you.
Good morning.
I think I want to be around the students. And those are so serious. Good morning again, and welcome to Flint. For those of you who don't know, I received my assignment in Flint March of 15th, and I'll be finished today. So in my short time here, the board has directed me to follow up with all the water issues and to then work with a partner. Our partner has been the Medical Society and the City of Flint. There's no way that a superintendent can make all the smart decisions that need to be made without knowing the history. So the history that has gone on was provided to me by Dr. Pugh. And I've been in meetings with about a third of you around this table. So I'm still putting all the pieces together and following suit. The board wishes to have their water fountains back on, but they won't do it until the Medical Society and the City of Flint says this is the safest water possible. We have gone through the flushing treatment. It has upset the board greatly that our students take time out of instruction to flush the water. If pilot flushing was used, they're saying, well, what are all the other students doing in the county of Genesee? And they feel that it's definitely a slap in the face. So with that attitude, with the amount of drama and emotions that goes around water, we've got to move swiftly, carefully, and we've got to sell it to the parents. Because the parents, you don't want to sit in my seat. My calls come in and they're very angry and want to know what's going to happen this summer. Well, I don't have all the answers. I don't try to have all the answers. So with that, I'm going to refer to Mrs. Pugh to walk us through a presentation that's very logical, that makes sense to everybody.
And I'll just give a little bit of the history, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Superintendent Witherspoon. But I just want to make mention that it was June of 2017 that the Flint Community Schools asked the City of Flint Technical Advisory Council, who we consult with Dr. Reynolds, Dr. Sullivan, and others to make sure that we're making sound decisions. So it's the medical community as well as the scientists that come together. But it was in June that the state of Michigan asked the city of Flint, Flint Community Schools, to come off of bottled water. And it was 2016 data in 2017 that was being used to ask the city of Flint to come off, the Flint Community Schools to come off of bottled water. I do also want to note that the Flint Community Schools was also being told that the other school districts, the charter schools and the ISD and the daycares were already off of bottled water. And I'll talk about that because we definitely found out that that was not true and still is not true. So the City of Flint Technical Advisory Council, and like I said, some of my counterparts are here as well, so they're aware of this. We immediately were able to meet, and so some of what we came up with was that before bottled water, the Flint Community Schools removed bottled water from their students, that we needed to make sure that there were provisions made for the special population. The Flint Community Schools has pointed out to us that not only do they have special needs children with cognitive issues, but also with digestive issues and some other things that we should really be concerned about their health. That there needed to be a monitoring and maintenance program that was in place, and that there needed to be some sort of flushing program. We talked about the health department being able to help. We talked about automated flushers. We also talked about some sort of monitoring devices that we were being made aware of. And so these were all things that we were talking about in July of 2017, and we continue to talk about because that is the route that the Flint Community Schools has rightfully decided to take. So we've continued to meet. We've held several meetings. George, you've been a part of those meetings, a lot of those meetings that we've had, where we've been able to look at the data together and then also determine the direction that we're going. We had several groups in January. Mayor Weaver and the superintendent and many of us took part in a press event where we stood firm with the Flint Community Schools on their decision to not move away from bottled water until this comprehensive type plan was put in place. We also had many resolutions, the Greater Flint Health Coalition, the Genesee County Health Commission, as well as others put forward resolutions. We also heard from our charter schools and other schools who also spoke with the same voice that Flint Community Schools had, that they had indeed not moved away from bottled water and had not planned to at that time, and as I said, they still have not. George has gone over some of the rounds of testing. It was after many meetings that we were able to convince the DEQ in the state of Michigan to do the baseline testing, which was 9 weeks, and then now we're into the quarterly testing. And in the first round, we did find that some schools were doing well, but then there were other schools that had problems. We found in round 2, we decided to move, it was Dr. Susan Maston who suggested that we clean the aerators, because that may be causing some of the spikes, but some of those levels spiked up even after we did clean the aerators, and George will tell you that there were some findings that we found that there were 2 aerators. And so as we went on, I say that to say that as we went and we did this type of back and forth discussion and testing, we were able to find that we didn't know everything that we thought that we did know, especially when the Flint Community Schools were being pushed to move off the bottled water. So as it stands right now, I'll just really quickly go through some of the concerns, and then I'll turn it back over to a superintendent. There are no laws or regulations that will require ongoing testing at the Flint Community Schools or any other schools in the city of Flint. And so that is why we think that we know we have to get it right, in addition to the fact that, as we stated earlier, the parents and the students in Flint need that peace of mind. So as we're having this rush to an end, that we feel that the state is pushing us to this end, we feel that there needs to be some comprehensive planning. There was the announcement of some model funding at this table, and we've quickly found out that model funding that was intended for Flint was not going to be enough, or the intended use was not going to get us to some sort of comprehensive plan. I mentioned Dr. Reynolds talked about some of the concerns that we have Dr. Sullivan has mentioned some of the concerns that are listed here, so I won't go into those. We do know that our child care facilities, as well as our schools, they're unique environments. We have times where the water will stagnate longer than 6 hours, longer than 12 to 14 hours. We also know that, as we talked about some of the remediation techniques that we've talked about, we need to go further in detail with that. So I won't list everything here. One of the big pieces, we know we have to have parent engagement because we need to have that confidence rebuilt. One of the other issues that I will also talk about is that as it relates to Flint Community School related communications. There's been a lot of communication that goes out. It's misinformation, it's confusing information, it's not coordinated in the way that we've asked that NDEQ coordinate that information with us. So I'm going to stop there, and I'll let Superintendent Witherspoon talk about the approach that they want to take.
We would definitely be on bottled water for the beginning of the school year until we resolve the issue. So we're prepared to go with bottled water. The second part is that we are being approached by philanthropists as well as donors who are asking, what are you doing next? So we are sitting down, the city and the district, and figuring out what are the next best steps. What are the safest steps? And so we're getting proposals that are putting on the table that would talk about the quality of water that you would meet in a surgical room. So we're talking about zero-based. We know that there's a 5% particles per million. There's a 15 parts per billion. We want zero. Our kids have already been exposed, so we're trying to work with everybody around us. We see that our filtration system is not the same when I walk into Genesee Health Systems or Power School. We have a different system, so we're looking at the same equipment and then perfecting that. So we can then sell to the parents, the medical society, and anyone walking into the Flint community schools and know that it's like, I think Dr. Weaver would call it, a model laboratory for the world. So anybody would know, we think we've found some solutions. We are aware that the filtration is only one part of the water system problem. The other part is the UV lighting that they use in surgical rooms that kills all the bacteria and microorganisms in the filters. We're looking at the back flushing. So we're trying to take care of all of it in one fell swoop and do it right the first time. Let me continue with any questions at this time.
Any questions from the group? No. Scott's reaching. Mr. Hippica.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time and for your explanation today. Pam, as you know, we've had a lot of discussions around this opportunity to support FCS as well as other schools across the state. And as you know, with the overall expenditure from House Bill 4320, which was obviously, that was effective on December 28th of 2017, the decision of how those funds would be spread across the state was made by, obviously, the Senate and the House. There was nothing that indicated that that money was ever going to come directly to Flint. We have had multiple discussions around this on countless occasions. As we look at the decision for bottled water to come, or for that to be, and the trigger for that overall was not the state of Michigan. That was, as you know, a number of private sector partners that had been donating water, and that contract was set to expire on December 31st of 2017. And you mentioned earlier that in 2016 the state had tried to push FCS to come off bottled water, and that date is not true. The overall findings around all of the water that George and the DEQ has spent countless hours studying, the data is clear, and I'll let George speak to the overall quality of the water. But in terms of, in this form, I think it's important that that our dates are accurate, and that the overall triggers for the removal of water was not the state, it was the coalitions, because that contract was ending. And so, just for the folks in this room as well, important to understand that those partners, they made a generous decision. While they could have ended that, and instead they chose to donate fiscal resources to FCS, which was very generous. And I know the superintendent and I have talked about this before, to support FCS going forward. And I believe that amount was around $70,000 to support Flint's purchase of bottled water for the schools.
Dr. Pugh?
I'm clear on my dates, and the Flint Community Schools in June of 2017 was asked to come off of bottled water. They were also told that their counterparts were no longer utilizing bottled water. We quickly, and I see Janika Patrick Singleton back there nodding her head, because we quickly found out that the Flint Community Schools were not on their own as it related to that issue. And thank God for the coalition that they stepped up and decided to give, again, fill in the gap where we feel that the state should not have left us alone.
I wasn't on Dr. Sullivan, then Dr. Reynolds.
I'll have to go back to my meeting minutes, but I know that there was a FLIC meeting at which Rich mentioned this funding and noted that this funding would be used to make Flint Flint schools a best-in-class model for the rest of the state or the nation for water. And maybe there was the intent to help other schools, but the impression that was left on those of us who are sitting here was that Flint was being, a highlight of that funding, and the goal was to make Flint schools water best in class. I do recall, and we can go back to the YouTube videos and find the time that was stated.
Yeah, I would encourage us to go and look at the transcripts and the videos, because the legislation was very clear. The money was appropriated to the Michigan Department of Education. I think Dr. Pugh would have been very knowledgeable about what the legislative intent was. And in that meeting, what I said was that we've learned an incredible amount about school water quality and best practices, and we should use that knowledge to make Flint the model of what all schools should be doing, and the schools need to be properly educated throughout the state. And I stand by those comments today. Flint Community Schools had very good reason. I think the predecessor superintendent was moving down that direction, and then there was a change in leadership. And I think, Dr. Witherspoon, you were drinking from the fire hose yourself, and I think that showcasing, making Flint the example of what best practice around the state entailed was just not something in your hours available to you wheelhouse. Was kind of my understanding through Scott Hippica. So that's what happened here. Nobody pulled anything away. Nobody played any fast and loose decisions. And I will be very vocal about any insinuation to the contrary.
Dr. Reynolds?
Thank you. All that discussion and budgetary considerations withstanding, I'm a pediatrician and my wife is an educator. One of the schools with the highest water lead levels was our neighborhood elementary school that my daughter attended briefly. And all this is due to loopholes in the federal lead and copper rules that have yet to be addressed as to how we will protect children who are in schools and other institutional buildings. And I'm embarrassed to sit at this table now and hear the lack of will to step forward and address this sufficiently. And I'd just like that on the record also. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Eric Oswald, FWIC subcommittee update, please.
Yeah, we'll go through very quickly. The FWIC Water Quality Infrastructure Subcommittee met on the 31st of July. Very quickly, we went over the Flint water loss report. Rob Benzik reported the system is still at 47% non-revenue water, 3.9% estimated to leakage, 43% to inaccurate meters and theft. Lead and copper rule sampling, 220 samples from Tier 1 sites. The 90th percentile for the January to June 2018 was 6 parts per billion. All samples were confirmed as coming from homes with a lead service line. And as George stated, the department has turned that sampling protocol over to the city. Lead service line replacement statistics. Number one, hydro excavations with no lead service line, 904. Conventional excavations with no lead service line ID, 1,751. Total lead service line replacements as of the 31st of July was 609, for a total of 3,264. There was a discussion on hydro excavation, and I took a action item from Director Cray to do some research with AWWA to develop industry standards, not only hydro excavation, but excavation procedures for identification of service lines in general, and that is underway with the president of the AWWA. Rob Benzick quickly stated the city has experienced 30 main breaks this summer. Again, water quality parameters in the city is doing very well maintaining water quality parameters. We monitor those on a daily basis. We had an excursion for pH for 2 days back in May, but other than that, the city has done an excellent job maintaining the water quality parameters in the system, and they're to be commended for that. I gave a quick update on the NSF Legionella study. The bottom line was the NSF was unable to complete the requirements and communications of the study, so that study was canceled. Fortunately, the KWR study will pick up some of that slack. So that funding was returned to Department of Health and Human Services, and the NSF Legionella study was canceled. There was a report on the settlement report. The next report isn't due until August, so we'll update it at that time. Water treatment plant staff, the last item on the status of the last item on the agenda, the long-term projects for the chemical feed building designed to do in 2019. The Flint did submit their intended use plan to the DEQ. The DEQ turned that around very quickly and got a project plan, an intended use plan submitted to the US EPA, and that is currently being reviewed at EPA Region 5. It's been there for about a week, so it was turned around very quickly. And again, the corrosion control study is underway. Lead pipes have not stabilized yet, so there's a long-term corrosion control study going on in the city of Flint that's being overseen by the city, by the state, and by the US EPA.
Dr. Sullivan, I know you have a question.
Yeah, just a real quick one. To my knowledge, the NSF study, at least originally, was focusing on filters. The KWR study, from what I hear, is not.
No, it's not.
It's not, okay, I just wanted to make sure.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I have a quick question, and you probably did give this information. What date are your numbers through?
Through 31st of July. Those were the statistics we had.
Okay, I was going to say, because they don't match the numbers
No, they
I
won't
have,
be correct.
Okay, I just wanted to check. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Any other questions for Eric? Yes, Dr. Reynolds.
I'm sorry, but as a Flint resident, I only know of one boil water advisory that was issued, so are there different types of water main breaks that one requires a citywide notification, one may require a local notification, or is a water main break a water main break?
There's differences, but I would refer that back to Mr. Benzick, who gave the statistics, so I'm not familiar with each type of break and how it happened and what the repercussions were.
Thank you, Mr. Oswald. Yeah, there are different tiers of breaks, so it's dependent on the size of the depressurized zone, the time the water main's down. Sometimes we can't control the trench water, so it becomes a boil water notice. There's a AWWA specification that we go by to kind of warn you guys if we think there's an issue. The one that you're referring to was actually a massive depressurization. It's actually probably the largest depressurization or second largest that I've seen in my time at the city, so that's why that turned into a citywide boil water notice. We just didn't know exactly who all was affected and who wasn't. The majority of the other breaks have been small. They're just small breaks. We've had a rash of them. We haven't really identified what the cause is. It happened, so.
Councilperson.
When are we expecting the EPA to respond to our project plan proposal?
They are turning that around very quickly. I will find out. I don't have an exact date, but
Do
I
you
know
know
it's
what's typical, Eric, for this kind of thing?
It's going to be probably a month, 30 days, 30 to 60 days. It is a priority for them, so they will get it turned around faster than the normal intended use plan.
Does that include the water meters that was in the plan for the wind funding?
We don't know. As you know, the city stood behind, or the state stood behind the city as far as the eligibility of the water mains, the water meters for the wind funding. We have yet to get a response from the EPA on the eligibility of those water meters for wind funding. So we just don't know at this point in time. We're expecting when they comment on the intended use plan that we'll finally get that answer.
Eric, maybe you could clarify this a little bit, because I needed to understand why the EPA would not consider or initially consider the water meters. And my layperson's understanding, which maybe you can add to, is that our proposal talked to them about how important we needed the meters for billing and collection purposes, but really what's most critical to us is the ability to use the meters in place of hydraulic studies to be able to understand how the water is moving and if it is moving throughout the city to prevent the possibility of stagnation and contaminants. Is that correct?
That's correct, and it goes back to legislative intent. The wind fundings were intended to deal with contaminants in the system. So on the face of it, when the EPA looks at water meters, usually it's a no. But because of the issues you demonstrated, as well as the revenue generation, we took that into a factor too. You can't fund a water system without proper revenue, and that has to do with contamination and things like that as well. So yeah, those are some of the things we're circling around back and forth. And then the argument was made through help from the city of Flint to argue that the water meters were indeed addressing a contamination issue. And so that's about a 2-page letter we sent to them backing up the city of Flint's request to use wind funds for the water meters. Sir.
Any other questions for DEQ on this?
I just want to sneak in a question here. I'm thinking of seeing the lead and copper rule here, and I'm thinking about the sampling that will be going on throughout the state. How heavily, as a result of the revised lead and copper rules, how heavily will the procedures that are used, or whatever that's being used to do pipe replacement in other cities, rely on what we do here in Flint?
Obviously, the new lead and copper rule requires every community to go back and review their system materials inventory, which is the baseline. So obviously, coming up with where your lead service lines are is critical, and that's what we're using in the city of Flint. That's why we're so interested in the hydro excavation and the techniques that the city of Flint has learned from, and I think it's leading the nation in that. So the city of Flint has informed the new lead and copper rule. As you know, we're no longer a single first draw sample. We're taking a second draw that's intended to reflect what's in the service line and inform us on that. So the lessons learned in the city of Flint and the report that came out influenced the new lead and copper rule very heavily.
So then I guess I would say then that we should be helping those other communities to know the difference between hydro excavation and traditional excavation, and making sure that anything that's being done in those communities, that Flint, that we're not trying to experiment here in Flint, and we're looking at the lower cost to help us drive what we do here in Flint, as we're looking forward to doing this in other communities.
We're looking at an effective and efficient identification of service line material. Cost is a huge concern for the rest of the state. You've got small communities that are going to be doing this work on their own dime with very little help from the state. So we've got to come up with an effective and efficient method of identifying service line composition that is effective, that works, and that gives us a probability that we're going to identify these service lines properly.
And so I just kindly ask that Flint's not the experiment that drives what you do in those communities, or that we're not driven to do something based on making sure that or knowing what we're going to do in those communities.
No, absolutely not. But the lessons learned in Flint, for instance, this conversation we're having about splices and where they occur and how they occur, will inform the rest of the state on where we ought to look for this with lead surface lines. Absolutely.
I've just been working with DEQ quite a bit on the formulation, both of the LCRs and how they implement them. You know, there are a number of other cities that we joined as sort of a best practices. How do we identify? Flint certainly being high among them, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Lansing. There are a number of cities that we all have to look at best practices to determine. And to Eric's point on cost, for those of you who want to help us pay for lead service lines, contact your legislators and get them to support the Rebuild Michigan legislation that's out there that would set aside at this point $50 million a year for lead service line and other infrastructure replacements. Thank you for the opportunity to plug.
Thanks.
Yes, Councilperson.
Yeah, getting back to that subject, I don't want to go back completely through it, but in regards, Rich, earlier you stated that you're in support of the best way to do this, and you said that thinking about doing the threading with the hydrovac. So what if the traditional is the best way to go, what's going to be the state's response, or how are you going to help the city of Flint get back doing that?
I think we are most interested in getting the job done properly. And while cost is clearly an issue because the governor doesn't handle appropriations, he has to have legislators do that. And because of the needs of communities all over the state, I just feel it's reasonable to expect a heavier lift if there's going to be additional monies needed that have not been appropriated. So while cost isn't the driver, Mayor, it's always a consideration because I'm afraid the pot is finite, not infinite. And but to specifically answer your question, we want to support the city in whatever the best and right way is to address the issues. And if we understand that the splicing issues require a bigger cut, and I have to rely on the experts in this area, then we're going to support a bigger cut. And if that cut can be done with a hydrovac, and it still provides comfort, wonderful. If that's indeed safer, Jim, and I don't know, I'm not an engineer, but and not even the engineers always agree on everything. But our position should be to support the city in getting what we started to do done, which is getting all of the dangerous lines, galvanized and lead, or any splicing or anything, out of the ground and give the residents the comfort that they deserve after the trauma they've endured. It's that simple, but I do want to make it clear that the reason we're so focused on cost is because we know what we've been given and we've got to make it last because we can't guarantee there'll be more.
Thank you. I think we're going to move on to new business. I would note that I've got 50 minutes on the agenda here, and there's some issues from Dr. Reynolds and Dr. Sullivan. I'm going to let Dr. Reynolds go first, but I'd like to sort of see if we can do this in 10 minutes, which gives us some wrap-up time. I understand the 1994 camcorder equipment is about to go out of warranty, so we don't want to run much past 11. Thank you.
Thank you. I was willing to meet every month as opposed to every other month or every 3 months, but to that effort, the fast track program, I'm not giving a report. My question was, how will reports be released so there's at least a predictable pattern that we know on a certain day of the month there will be an update. As far as the status of water shutoffs go, my understanding is there were up to 300 water shutoffs a week at last report, and now there were 150 reestablished. Is there any information on that? And the number of delinquent water bills, the average amount, because that does relate to people getting delinquent water bills attached to their property taxes and water liens put on their property, and is driving young families out of the city. And then there's always a part B to my inquiry, and that is we have a hepatitis A outbreak in the state, especially southeastern Michigan, and probably for the 3 or 4 statewide region. Is it wise to shut off people's water when a hepatitis A outbreak has not been resolved, so they can't wash their hands, flush their toilets, clean their dishes, and do all those things that I would tell a patient to do to prevent the spread of hepatitis? And I have been asking the department, the State Department of Health and Human Services, does this make sense? When we had, what was it, over 80,000 water shutoffs in Detroit, where the hepatitis A outbreak was first noted, and it has continued to spread throughout the state. Are we really doing the smartest thing? And maybe there's something that I've missed, but it would be helpful if someone could explain the rationale of shutting off people's water that they use for personal hygiene in the midst of a hepatitis A outbreak.
I'm going to go back to your first question, and Rob can give you a quick answer to that, I think.
So I have numbers from the Fast Start program that are from August 14th. So they're pretty well up to date. So we have, to date this year, we have replaced 704 service lines. We have done 4,520 excavations. And then if we want to go totals from all 5 phases to date, we've replaced 6,932 service lines, and we have done 13,352 total excavations or total identifications of either replacement of copper and or identified them as copper. Probably right now as we sit here, we are very close to going over 14,000 thus far in the project.
And I think the other question was, how can this be reported routinely?
So, okay, so Candace puts out a weekly report on the progress of Fast Start. I'm not sure if you guys are included on that email, but I think it becomes a media release for her. So hopefully that would help you keep up to date on it.
So that would be on the city website?
It's on the city website, and I believe she puts it out as a press release.
I only bring it up because it's kind of scary following media releases. Thank you. All right, thank you.
And Steve is working with AECom to actually do the graphic. That was one that General McDaniel was doing, so I know we've been meeting with AECom to make sure we get that information out.
And I'll add this, we talked about this, we have a weekly meeting with AECom, so Steve and I have kind of had to finalize what we think is adequate for their graphic. They have what I think is a really nice graphic, and it shows every service line that's been done, as you know, would be up to date on that particular address. Sometimes it lags a few days, but it's nice. You can look at each phase. You can click on your address and see what's been done there. And that will be broadcast here shortly, probably sometime next week.
I was just going to say the graphic is available on the website next week. And the map.
Any other questions?
We still have the issue of the wisdom of the water shutoffs in the midst of a regional and a state region hepatitis A outbreak. If you look at all the risk categories, we talk about homeless, IV drug abusers, men who have sex with men, and transient housing. Okay, well, if someone lives in a house and their water is shut off, that's equivalent to being kind of homeless or transient housing, and we are putting populations at risk. And again, I have not heard an answer to the question, what is the rationale behind water shutoffs in the major population centers in the region in the midst of this hepatitis A outbreak?
And Dr. Reynolds, When you raised that question, unfortunately, Dr. Wells is not here. I have texted her and asked her to get in contact with you.
I can
I've
speak.
submitted this question in writing on several
have it.
occasions. And that was initially, what, 6 months ago or 4 months
speak
ago?
to it.
Thank you.
And I certainly can't speak to the hepatitis A outbreak. It's not my area of expertise. What I can speak a little bit about is the financial solvency of the utility. And Mr. Newsom can probably speak in great detail to that if he needs to. But the city of Flint, unfortunately, our utility is on the brink of insolvency all the time. We simply have to collect the revenue in order to maintain our solvency. And that's not to make light of any health issues. I think from a utility standpoint, we're not looking at that as an issue, or we don't have the luxury to look at it as an issue because we simply have to generate the revenue. We don't have an option.
Dr. Sullivan? Oops, Dr. Reynolds, sorry.
I just hope that will not remain the official position of the city, the state, or the federal government. We've talked about health in all policies, and lacking health in all policies as a member of the Flint Water Advisory Task Force and the Environmental Justice Work Group, lacking that commitment to health in all policies is what has placed us here. Thank you.
And Dr. Reynolds, I totally concur with what you're saying. And so well, Huey can speak to what the financial constraints and what the regulations are as far as why and how we have to collect. But we are working on, we've worked with Communities for Neighborhood Technology to look to see what are some things that the city can strategize with. But just recently, the Mott Foundation down in Detroit met with a group of environmentalists, you name it, few policy folks. I should say that it was more of a closed group, but we will need the help of the state as we look to do innovative things to address this public health issue. And we do know that water affordability is a public health issue. So we're trying to address our financial health as well as move as quickly